Welcome to Cactus Crossfire, your go-to for hot takes and prickly debates.
Welcome in, everybody. Carlos Irtate, that is welcome in Greek. Here, I'm your host, Sisto Abeyta. With me is Eddie Ableser. We're both back for our 8th episode of Cactus Crossfire.
Let's go.
Fresh from our
European
Cactus Crossfire
travels.
European travels.
What are we doing?
Well, you know,
And here we are, 86, 88 Studios, the home of Gabriel Baca, the man who is so terrifying, he sleeps underneath the boogeyman's bed.
well,
Let's go.
You know, and if you spent enough time as you and I did on European flights, we got to watch all 4 episodes of John Wick.
Man, I went to 6 countries. We did Netherlands, Belgium, France, Germany, Austria, and Poland. It was a World War II sort of pilgrimage. So a little bit of vacation, but we went to very, very educational and meaningful sites where many of my ancestors living in Krakow and various regions around Poland and Hungary were taken to Auschwitz. I don't want to get too deep on that, but that was the purpose of the trip. I brought my children, my wife, and had a phenomenal experience in Europe.
Yeah.
How about you, Sisto?
I'm just a lowly guy, and I just decided to go to Athens, Greece, for a nice 2 weeks vacation, which was very nice. We got to tour the countrysides of Greece and visit a lot of interesting places, which, I was very happy to, the interesting part for me, this was my first European vacation, and while I was there, thinking about it coming back, is I didn't feel like I was in Europe. I felt like I was still.
Really?
I really didn't. I felt like I was kind of closer to home. But we're gonna get into some of that as we go on with the show. I think that the interesting part of those areas is this the cultural differences between here in the United States. It was for me, and I'm still wearing a little bit of my Greek attire. And if anybody saw any of my socials, you'll see that I was predominantly wearing this hat and a number of other very nice shirts, which Mandy loves to give me the great thumbs up on my fashion choices. But what was very interesting for me is that as I was walking around Greece, folks automatically thought I was Greek. A lot of folks were coming straight up to me. And they were saying, "Hey, Greco," and I was like, "No," and then they would be Españolo, and then I would start talking to them in Spanish, and then they automatically thought I was from Spain. But then when I explained to them, "No, yo no soy españolo, soy un nuevo mexicano," that really threw them for a loop. They're like, "What the heck is a nuevo mexicano? We don't understand what that is." So there you go.
Yeah, the new one.
The new one. They hadn't seen the new one yet. So,
well, listen, man. I loved our trip, but I will tell you, we were happy to be home in the U.S. of A. It was a great experience. I enjoyed the cultural significance, the history, the rich, deep history of all these different places. But, a couple things, man, like we are in Amsterdam, and my kids, they're excited. We're like, hey, let's go to souvenir shops. We could not find a souvenir shop in Amsterdam that wasn't selling boobs or a penis. Yeah. I don't get it. And I guess it is Amsterdam, right? And the legalization of everything. But we should be used to that in Nevada.
I landed in Amsterdam on my way to Greece. When I got to Greece, there was a lot of very large penis keychains all over Greece.
It's bizarre. Yeah, it's unbelievable. Yeah,
so
that's the tourism thing. And then we went to Belgium, we went to Brussels, and they're obsessed with like statues of boys and girls and dogs peeing, and that was fun. Our kids got to enjoy that. There's the pissing mannequin, and it was pretty hilarious. So we enjoyed that. I'll tell you this: one, water. What the heck, Europe? Come on. It's cheaper to buy beer and wine than it is to buy a bottle of water in Europe. I think we went broke just purchasing either flat or sparkling water for our family. This goes to my other theory, right? Socialist nation, but they don't have any public restrooms, right? You got to pay to use the restroom.
No.
So we saw people peeing on the streets, which I thought was crazy. Second of all, that's why they don't, people don't buy water, because then they're going to have to spend €2 to go use the bathroom and pee in the bathroom. So the whole like engagement of drinking a $10 bottle of water is ridiculous. So those are some of our big critiques. I also found that there wasn't an investment in like beautification. You know, we
Yeah.
didn't see the beautification of buildings and mixed materials like we see in the U.S. Like there's an investment in the commercial space in the U.S. There, it's just gray or black or gray or brown concrete,
Well,
right?
in it being in Greece, Greece does have a pretty dilapidated economy, and we actually stayed outside of Athens. We actually stayed in Marathonis, which is where the very first marathon was ever run.
Oh.
And while we were staying out there, one of the things that we noticed is that a lot of the industrial buildings that they had on the island or on the inlet had pretty much been shut down. A lot of these factories had been shut down, and they totally gut these entire buildings and they just leave the frames up. And you saw that all over Marathonis. You saw that in Rafina. You saw that in some of the other areas that we visited. They are, we went on a boat trip one day, and our captain actually told us that that about 7 million people visit Greece a year, which is the total population of the entire country. And so they double the population just by having all of these tourists show up. But like you said, Eddie, one of the other things is you were talking about public restrooms. We were pressed to find public restrooms in Greece, but once I found them, they became landmarks for me along Greece. But the other comfort that I was happy to have when I got back home was the amount of toilet paper I could once again start to use. So that was a great thing for me coming in, and especially because you eat those big hearty meals while you're in Greece. So there you go.
Absolutely.
But we're happy to be back. We're happy to be here with everybody talking about what's coming up in the political spectrum. Right now, our gubernatorial races and our elections are starting to heat up, and our candidates are starting to get asked the hard questions. They're starting to be, where do they stand on positions and everything else? And this last couple of weeks, we had a gubernatorial candidate out of California who...
Man, California is going to be a hot mess, Sisto.
Yeah.
But you're right. I think we've got something that we're going to take a look at.
Well, let's cue that up, Mandy.
So I'm on the oversight committee, you might know, and that is where we did a study recently this fall in September, and what it showed is if we don't electrify our transportation sector, that we're going to lose more than 500,000 Californians dying prematurely to air pollution and other problems, and the state could lose... Get out of my fucking shop!
What? Oh.
It's not that it's electric vehicles, it's that if we don't meet the commitments under the Paris Climate Accord. Okay, it does. Okay, you also were in my shop before that. Stay out of my shop. Okay, I'm going to start again with electric vehicles saving us money. Perfect.
Yeah.
Dude, Karen Porter, you are crazy. What the heck was that, Sisto? Man, I have never seen the drunk with power ego of a politician like that with Miss Karen Porter.
You know, something happens to people when they get elected. And I don't know, I've never been an elected official, and I'll definitely defer to you, Eddie, on that point. But, over the years of working with a lot of them, after a couple of terms of serving in office, something happens with them. They either start believing their own hype, or they believe that they are above all sorts of societal norms who would just scream for decency with people. I served working in the New Mexico legislature for so many years. I worked for a number of different individuals. Definitely have had my moments of get the hell out of my effing shot thrown at me. It's happened even more recently in the New Mexico legislature. There was a whole story about it. But there's just something that happens with these candidates, and I don't know what it is. You know, the only thing I can think of is it's a 3-letter word, and it starts with E, and it's with the G and an O. You know, it's a lot of ego, and and when that ego is exposed, what does that what happens to those candidates, and how often is that ego exposed?
Well, listen, let's be clear. You have to have a level of ego to enter and expose yourself to the criticism and dynamics of being in the public light, right? Someone without that internal instinct and ability to sort of compartmentalize the criticism and the praise that comes along with the job. The problem is people like Miss Karen Porter, what does she do? Right? She creates one big compartment of praise. So she thinks that her proverbial shit don't stink.
Yeah.
And so she acts in a way that pushes this I am the leader, right? And here's the other thing. There was another clip out there where she was like being interviewed and she's like, I'm done. I'm getting up. I'm walking away. And the reporter's like pushing her. And it wasn't like a hard issue either, but she's like, I'm not going to answer your question. And almost like this self-righteousness that occurs, right? So
well, and I mean,
the whole environment, it's set up for people like this.
But for candidates like, and let's get this straight. I think Eddie's making a little joke. He does know that her name is Katie instead of Karen. Yeah.
I thought she was going to be the first Karen governor of California.
Well, there you go. And I think that one of the things that was a take back for me was watching people like Antonio Villaraigosa answer the same question, Javier Becerra answer the same question, and I had to think a bit because, you know, we've been talking about this here on Cactus Crossfire quite a bit about, you know, Hispanic males and Hispanic masculinity and all these other things, is if one of them had reacted the same way to a staffer, what would have happened to them? What would have the backlash been for them? And a lot of the times...
#me too, right? They would have been canceled.
And they would have been canceled. And, you know, when you're looking at somebody, and I think that the reason it's become such a heightened sense of notoriety for Congresswoman for Katie Porter is that in her world she has built a persona around herself of being the advocate for the suburban mom, right? She's the suburban mom, she's the soccer mom, and all of those, and that's kind of, if you watched any of her hearings in Congress, you know, she was always, you know, railing against the credit card companies about, you know, the fees that they charge on single mothers and how those fees were horrible for them and everything else. But as you look at who Katie Porter really is, Katie Porter, you know, she grew up in Iowa. Her father was a farmer and a banker. I'll say that again, a farmer and a banker. Now, I'm just poor little old Sisto Abeyta from little old New Mexico. I grew up on a farm. My dad was a farmer, and he was no banker. That's for sure. So is that relatable? But I think she's been able to create that narrative around herself that she is working class, you know, and that she, you know, has had, you know, comes from this background that she's able to relate to people. But that video right there that we just saw, I don't know anybody who could relate to somebody who would treat staff that way. And I think that this is something that's been coming about for a while now. We're looking at management styles, and governors are super, super important because their whole job is managing stuff. You know, their whole job is operating the day-to-day of their states. And a lot of, and when you can't have respect for your staff, how are you going to have respect for the people that you're trying to serve?
Well, and listen, I mean, you know, we talk about what the Democratic Party has morphed into, right? And you know, we got a lot of pushback of, Eddie, you know, why are you guys talking about masculinity? Men have been in power for decades, and it's time for the women to lead. And I mean, I feel like, first of all, y'all aren't watching our full podcast because we are absolutely highlighting amazing women and amazing men within the Democratic Party that need to take the mantle. But if we get so narrowed-eyed into the identity politics of the party, Sisto, right? And we start canceling out individuals, which we've talked about in the past, right? For a litany of things. And we focus on that candidate must be the candidate because that candidate has an identity of woman, right? Or girl or feminine, right? Whatever that identity, that's what we need. That is it. That's the number one qualification. That's when the Democrat Party comes up with candidates like Governor Karen who come out here and they're not relatable. They are off-putting. No one likes someone like that. And then if she's the nominee, all of a sudden we get, the Democrats lose in the general election because no one wants to vote for someone like that, Sisto. And like that's the problem with our primaries.
Well, and that's what's that's what's problem with the political spectrum on both sides, right? I mean, on both sides. It's not just Democrats, it's also Republicans. Is people will do whatever they can, and it's because of that three-letter word, ego, that and I think it doesn't just permeate through candidates, but I also think it permeates into our class, the political consultants class, of saying we have the right messaging, we know how to win, and everybody else be damned, and we're just going to go down the road. And sometimes in creating that narrative, folks are often thinking, what's the next election? What's coming down the road? Which leads us to our next subject for the day.
And Sisto, leading into that, like think about the current governor of California, right? And he goes on podcasts. There's gotcha politics that happens in every podcast. He was on the Higher Learning podcast by Van Latham. I don't know if you saw this. We don't need to play the clip.
Yeah.
But Van Latham's like, listen, man, I'm not going to vote for anyone who took even $1 from IPAC.
Yeah.
What the hell? Like some snot-nosed kid who worked for TMZ that did basically gotcha journalism. He ain't a journalist, let's be clear, but gotcha. That's what he predicated his whole career on. So now he's going to try to do gotcha journalism on this new podcast with elected officials and calling people out because maybe they took money from IPAC. And yeah, you know what? Newsom danced around it because he basically, if I was Newsom, I'd be like, man, you're an idiot. The podcast is called Higher Learning, and there's nothing but stupidity embedded in the entire podcast. Absolutely link that in our bio because that dude needs to understand that he's being called out. But Sisto, what's happening nationally, internationally?
And internationally, thinking about elections going down the road, how midterms are starting to permeate and grow, and where are we at? In the last couple of days, we've found out that our President Donald Trump, has negotiated a ceasefire in Gaza.
Huge.
That's huge. And it's and folks are looking at this and commenting on it and have opinions about it. And the one thing that's missing out of all of it has been, as Eddie was so animated to point out, that this is a big deal. This is huge, and it seems very hard for people in my party to recognize that and to give credit where credit is due. Now, some folks are sitting back and they're saying, that they can't really be giving him any credit for this because, this is a part of we don't want to give him any big outs for the upcoming midterms, and this is a huge win for him. And it's something that could change the trajectory of his presidency. But at the same time, we won't just recognize people for when they do good things and when they do the right thing finally.
It's unbelievable. And listen, this is problematic in both areas, right? Because, you highlight a success from your opponent, all of a sudden you're giving your opponent ground or substantiation. Listen, man, Democrats can still beat the Republicans up for litany of issues. Republicans can do the same for Democrats. Acknowledging a success at such a tantamount level of a peace treaty in war-torn Gaza, right, where you have a terrorist organization that has asserted itself as control over the Palestinian people, and the Israeli government, who is intervening to, one, try to free the Palestinian people from a terrorist regime, but secondly, protecting their citizens in Israel from the same terrorist dynamics. I think it's huge, man. Like you had all these actors coming out, right? And they all, they all chanted their slogans and they all talked about all this stuff. And now that Trump came out with a peace plan, where are they all at? Right? I was talking on my social media. I mean, it's nothing but crickets. The progressives in the Democratic Party are furious that there's peace in the Middle East right now. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous. I'm going to have some progressives punching back at me and saying, Eddie, you must be an idiot for saying something like that. You get what I'm trying to say, right? Well, all these people marching, protesting, calling for divestment in Israel, all these talking points. Now that Israel's like, yes, we want peace. Trump, the leader, bringing peace. What do they have to stand on? What is their argument? What is their talking point, Sisto? What do progressives talk about now in the Middle East?
I mean, it's, I think that there's a disconnect with people in regards to the Palestinian-Israel issue. And I think that it's bred out of this idea that a lot of folks see, I think the folks that you're talking about, and I could be wrong, and if you're wrong, put it in the comments. We'll talk about it later. But my gut is telling me that a lot of folks are seeing somehow Israel got seen as the colonizers in all of this. They got seen as the white colonizers who came into this area, started settling on these poor little Palestinians and pushing them out of their neighborhoods. And, and I hadn't really thought about that until I started looking at, who were the people on October 7th who were taken hostage. And when you look at them, they've got light eyes. They've got a full head of hair like my good friend Eddie. They look a little bit on the lighter side. They may have a nice, summer tan like I do, but they don't look like Palestinians. And I think that a lot of and one of the things is it became for me this cognitive dissonance about whether or not this was really what people thought it was. And in that of looking at this and saying, how can, everybody wants to be anti-war, but everybody wants to take a side in this situation, right? And what drove that? Where did that come from? How did this all happen? Well, the table has been set for this narrative to start showing its ugly head for quite a while. And we haven't taken a step back. And that's where we fail as humans is that we don't want to take a step back and empathize with the guy across the street. We know that this is ours and this is what we think and we know what is right. Well, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you don't know what's right. Sometimes your values get conflicted and you don't know how to deal with it. Eddie?
Let's go back to Europe. I was walking through Krakow and took my family and we took a nice little walk down the street. And we were going to Schindler's Factory, very important part in the World War II narrative, the thousands of lives that he has saved. When you magnify that, right, the hundreds of thousands of people that are now populating this world because of his actions, right? We were talking to our kids. He's the only Nazi in history that was awarded that Medal of Honor because of his actions. So we walked there, and I'm telling you, we probably saw Free Palestine, Death to Israel, Death to America, written, graffitied on no more than a dozen signs along the path. And I'm thinking to myself, this is a normal path because people coming from the main square to Schindler's Factory, right? And they're also driving, taking little cars. This was intentional. This was something that we didn't just see in Krakow. I saw it in Paris. I saw a lot of it in Brussels and Amsterdam. Didn't see anything in Austria, thankfully, or Germany. But the point is, the world has gotten to a point where we have forgotten the history of World War II. and the diaspora of Jews across the world on where were they to go. What were they supposed to do? We got to visit Anne Frank's museum in Amsterdam. My kids, we read, and the most amazing thing is it took almost 2 years for Anne Frank's dad to get out of the concentration camp and come and find a place to live, because nowhere in Europe wanted Jews.
Yeah.
So what happened, right? So all the Jews, through the the developments of the international community, created this place that, okay, the indigenous space, Judea and Samaria, where Jews, the Mizrahi Jews were from, the European Jews, or, the Ashkenazi Jews, and I know I'm not saying it correctly, that's my heritage, but those individuals who are a little bit lighter skinned, that have the European element, also immigrated and populated and what became Israel, right? And I think it's important because, here we just had Columbus Day, and you had progressives standing up and saying Indigenous People Day. And that's important. I'm not trying to mock that, right? But Indigenous People Day, Sisto. And I'm seeing replete through my social media, all of my Native American friends who are chanting for Indigenous People Days, tribal sovereignty, tribal rights, which I fully support. But in the same breath, they have all these huge posts underneath it saying Free Palestine.
Yeah.
The lack of either education and ignorance that individual is exhibiting by not recognizing that they are advocating for the freedom of a colonizer that colonized through a very violent conquest in the 7th century all of these Middle East lands. And that these progressives don't see that, Sisto? What the hell's going on here?
And I think you hit the nail on the head. Okay, these are all things that, you and I are still old enough. I wish we could say young enough now, but I just had a birthday, so I'm getting closer to the big 50. But you and I had extensive immersion into World War II. And why was that? Because our grandparents were a part of that greatest generation. We heard from them the stories of what was happening in the 40s. We heard from them how family members left the United States to go fight and liberate the Jews in Europe. And even I remember being, probably this was either 91 or 92 when the Holocaust Museum opened up in Washington D.C. and walking through that place and seeing what those folks, and it was a new exhibit. And I remember walking through and thinking to myself, we can never let this happen again. We can never let this happen again. Now, things escalated in this situation that led to this conflict, and it all kicks off on October 7th or October 3rd. October 7th.
October 7th.
October 7th, because, you had a group of individuals at a concert. Okay, it was the Supernova concert that was being held. It was one of the largest festivals in Europe. It was a very expensive festival, right? A lot of kids that could afford to go went, and they were overrun by Hamas. 1,200 people died.
Start off, though, not just overrun. What happened? Hamas shot missiles into Israel.
Yeah.
They did this as a distraction.
Yes.
And what happened? The IDF was looking at these missiles because, remember, people don't realize at this moment, IDF, Israel, there is no military engagement in Gaza.
Yeah.
Gaza was self-governing at this point. But Gaza had elected Hamas to run its people.
But again, Eddie, when you're looking at that narrative and you're looking at these people you're talking about the U.S. progressives who are being sympathetic towards these Palestinians, what they see is, and you're pointing it out, they see a bunch of rich white kids having a big time of their life in a party. And what they feel was stolen land. Now, that's as far as their education on the issue went. That's as far as what they understood the situation to be. And then slowly they started seeing the response that happened in Gaza, and they started seeing the people who are affected in Gaza. And you know what? They look like their friends that live in these impoverished communities wherever they may be.
Yeah.
And they automatically assumed that it was these white oppressors coming in to screw over these poor people. Now, the
moment that happens, Sisto, what I remember, like, let's get in, Turning Point, USA, all these different conservative groups. What do they say? They're like, oh, is that not racism?
Yeah.
I mean, listen, man, racism is the preconceived prejudice of someone based on how they look.
But this is the thing, though.
Yeah.
I mean, Eddie, this whole narrative was scripted before even October 3rd, or October 7th.
7th.
It was, and when did it start? With the godfather of progressivism, Jimmy Carter.
Yeah.
He wrote a book.
Yep.
Called Palestine. It's called Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid.
Jeez.
He set that narrative. He set that narrative then.
I know, and no disrespect to Jimmy. I mean, I have tremendous, respect for the work he did as president. And I mean, think about it. This former president's out there building homes and trying to help people. But you're absolutely right. There is a problem within the Democratic Party of racism.
But it's because
there is,
and part of this is, Eddie. I mean, think about this. I'm Jimmy Carter, right? I'm Jimmy Carter. I'm a nuclear submarine engineer, and I'm touring Palestine. But also, I'm Jimmy Carter, who grew up in rural Georgia during Jim Crow South. And just like you and I are talking about this, right? We're talking about our experiences of going to Europe, right? And I told you this about my experience in Greece, is I didn't feel like I left home. Why? Because I saw poverty. I saw real people struggling every single day to earn and make a living. And as a part of that, Jimmy Carter goes to Palestine. And he walks through Palestine and he starts hearing these people's plights. And what does it remind him of? Jim Crow in the South at the same time. And that was his narrative. That's what he could relate to. And sometimes we have to take a step back and look outside of ourselves and say, okay, this is my experience, but is this really the experience that's happening here right now? And really
does that articulate to truly what has the history of the Middle East? I mean, you're absolutely right. Like what, 40 years, not even 40 years after the Holocaust, less than that, 30 years after the Holocaust, when, Jews have no home and are finding a place to go. And there's the British mandate that creates this state, and that there has been multiple opportunities for two-state solutions. Jimmy doesn't address that. Jimmy sees with his eyes and reflects upon the immediacy and the temporal nature of what happens immediately in front of him. This is what's driving me crazy with these Democrat progressives right now, like Michigan, right? They're saying genocide, the genocide happening right in Palestine. And I'm looking at, in Michigan specifically, you've got two candidates, I think it's Stevens and Abdul coming out and saying, oh, genocide. The peace agreement happens, Sisto. There's no genocide. But guess what's still happening even today? We can turn on the news right now, and what are we going to see? Hamas is executing people in the streets in Gaza right now. There are Palestinians pleading for the United States to come in and assist against a terrorist organization.
And this is the interesting part about Americans watching this thing unfold, internationally, is that you have this playing out in a gubernatorial race, right? And when you're looking at the makeup of even the U.S. Congress, right? 34 members of Congress are Jewish. and 5 of them are Arab, identify as Arab. Okay, but of the Arab population right now in the United States, it's growing faster than the Jewish population, even though you have 7.5 million Jewish Americans as of the last census, and you have 3.7 million Arabs. But prior to that, Arab Americans are growing at an exponential rate in comparison to the Jewish population in America. Okay? Last election, we had this conversation. There was political discussion in the Democratic Party of whether or not Biden should actually send money to Gaza to help them rebuild, because he had a large Arab population in Pennsylvania.
Yep.
That was a conversation. That was an actual conversation that was being had. And, you know, and you hear a lot of folks talking about this situation, but it's interesting. Would we have done the same thing if somebody had gone in, if another terrorist group had gone in and done this to another community? Would we have said, even though they responded, appropriately, would we have said, you know what? Yeah, they came in, they killed 1,200 people, have 200 and some hostages, had a number of rapes and everything else that they did. But you know what? We're going to send them money to help rebuild their city. Would we have done that
to people that are covering over it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it makes me think of an incident that did happen. Sisto, yeah. You know, the Taliban.
Yeah.
Right. And what they did to this country, to New York City, right, in 2001.
Yeah.
Killing, 1,500, 1,600 people, biggest, tons of death. And what did the U.S. do in kind?
So I
the
think
U.S. turned around and did even more.
Yeah.
There's over 300,000 Afghanistanis killed in that war, and
Yep.
Iraqis.
Yeah.
But these progressives can't, right? What's that old biblical adage, right? You got to remove the splinter from your eye, or stop talking about the splinter in other people's eyes when you have that whole piece of wood of blocking your image.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think that, Eddie, a lot of the times, we're taking on these issues because we want people to start thinking. I mean, that's what we've always asked. That's why we've created Cactus Crossfire, is to raise the conversation, to make people think, to make people do homework, to make people actually look into this. I mean, and I'll be honest with everybody before this show, I had to take a look at all of this, and I had to make up my mind of where I was going to land on all this. Yes, I had a lot of friends that were protesting, and I couldn't understand why, but I took the time. I took the time to do a little bit of research, not just only to Google a few words, but to Google some real in-depth questions of the world and find out where it led me. And this is a complicated issue, and it's not something that, and this is the great thing about the ceasefire, okay? Because it is a ceasefire. It's not really a whole deal, because, as much as I love the president saying that he's the king of the art of the deal, his deals are always just a little bit unfinished, okay?
Yeah.
And I think our leaders are right. Some of these other folks were happy that it's happened. We're happy that the ceasefire has taken place. But now we have to, the devil gets in the details, right? So now who's going to make sure that Israel doesn't attack Gaza again? Who's going to make sure that Palestine gives up the weapons that they say that they're going to give up? Because we've had this offer of weapons being given up before. I think you and I remember a guy that had done this a couple years, a couple of decades ago. And yeah. Bill Clinton sat on the White House lawn with these two people, and they shook hands and said, "We're going to work it out." And here we are, 20 years later, and we're still working it out.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think the struggle that we see amongst our democratic narrative, and this is going to be a big election, Sisto, right?
Yeah.
If Mamdani gets elected as mayor of New York, right? Here you have a guy who talks about, supporting violent uprising against Israel with the Intifada, right? If you have like Abdul getting elected for the Senate in Michigan, you're going to see a move amongst the Democratic Party that is not comprehensive, right? The Democratic Party is this big tent, right? This idea that we bring everyone in. And I want to be clear, there are a lot of amazing Arab politicians within the Democratic Party. There are a lot of amazing Muslim politicians within the Democratic Party through state government, right, up and down. The problem comes when we have a Muslim, and I want to emphasize on the Muslim advocate, become a politician and perpetuates a narrative that creates an us versus them dynamic. You don't see Jews talking about getting rid of Palestine, right? You see Jews talking about two-state solution, giving Arabs in Palestine the ability for autonomy, right? You see, even in Israel, politicians asking for peace by having a harmonious dynamic between ethnic variations within the region. Even though, right, you can peel that back and say, sure, there was the Philistine area and then the Judea area and the Sumerian area and all the different ethnicities that created the indigenous population of that area. Now it's this beautiful mosaic that exists, but is designed and divided by religious extremism. And now we're seeing that in the United States. We're seeing progressives being co-opted by religious extremism, and that is what scares me for our future. Democrats need to stand up against any sort of violent language and violent protest that talks about harming the other. And that is not our party, Sisto.
But
that is not how we do things.
But this is the thing, Eddie. I mean, part of the issue is that when we're talking about this, and you said that, I think you had said earlier that it's an us versus them thing, and we don't need to be falling into that narrative. Right now, folks on our side of the aisle within the Democratic Party, they have been co-opted since, Citizens United happened. Let's be honest, by independent expenditure organizations because they have the money, right? And whoever has the money gets to create the narrative. Now, we saw in this last election how some of the narratives that these organizations on J Street, not K Street, J Street, because that's where all the not-for-profits are, were creating narratives that necessarily weren't true for folks.
Yep.
Necessarily weren't the real issue, but they polled high enough for us to make it an issue. And are we looking at this situation right now in the American political spectrum of, are people looking at the Palestine-Israel narrative because it was easy for them to sell? It was easy for them to say, look, those are the poor minority people and those are the rich white people and they're oppressing them. Was that a real easy thing to make people understand in American society? Yes.
Well, especially amongst progressives, right?
Yeah, but was it right? Heck no. No. But what happens is we live in this political, this hyper chamber of political discourse that if we don't have the answers right now, we don't know the answer. And that's where we have to take that step back. We got to do a little bit of research. We got to do a little homework. We got to understand. Like, the most interesting thing to me was coming across this whole thing with Jimmy Carter. I read that book in the 90s, and I thought to myself then, oh my God, this is so horrible. These poor people. But fast forward, it's like, and it's funny, it's another great...
But I didn't mean to laugh. Listen, yes, it is horrible, many of the situations that are occurring in many extremist countries in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Like we forget that we have true genocide occurring right now in Congo. We have true genocide occurring in Syria, that people are not going to the streets, where the Druze, not Jews, the Druze are being exterminated by Assad and his government. We have true genocide occurring in Yemen and the Houthis, right?
Yep.
And, you know, my brother Tall in the Holy Land, you know, I want to link his bio in there, Mandy. Tall in the Holy Land is magnifying this issue throughout all the Middle East, that Arabs are being exterminated by ethnic superiority that occurs within countries, by extremist governments that are creating totalitarian regimes. But guess what, Sisto, right? The progressives have it figured out. It's all Israel's fault, right? And that's to me the most upsetting thing here, is that we are seeing, look at Sudan, man. I mean, we're seeing hundreds of thousands of people dying. We can actually create change if we applied a little bit of the political pressure that Miss Susan Sarandon gets up on her soapbox and tries to apply to these areas that there's actual pain occurring. And then, yes, let's move towards an angle where Palestine and Israel can create some semblance of peace and work in harmony. But we have to stabilize the region. This is a broader issue, right? It is not a simple slogan of Free Palestine.
We knew that this was going to be we've known that this is a broader issue for 20 years. Since we first saw, Sharon and, who's the head of the Palestinian?
Arafat.
We saw it then. And we saw two individuals who were moving towards some semblance of peace, of having a dialogue. And what happened to those two individuals? Extremisms on both sides took them out, right? Extremism on both sides said, you're not representing us, and at the end of the day.
But I do there needs to be a historical clarity there, Sisto, and I think it's important because we're doing things, every single time. And I do believe that Arafat did try, right?
Yeah.
But I do want to say that you look at the votes within the democratic notions of Israel. They always supported seven peace agreements that created two-state solutions.
Yes.
If you look in the history since 49, every single time there was intervention by some extremist, whether it was the Ayatollahs in Iran, right, that came in and wanted to utilize this fight within Palestine to create that wedge with Israel and Jews. And I think that's important to recognize that yes, there have been leaders that have tried, but they have failed because of the supporting elements. Now, I'm hopeful with this new agreement. You have Qatar, you have Egypt coming to the table, Sisto. I think it's really important. And I think this is the conversation where it's like, is it luck that Trump is in this situation? Or did Trump do something good? Can progressives, can Democrats come out and say, hey, President Trump, good job. You did something here.
Well, I
don't see them doing it that much.
Well, I think that, but that's the new rules, right? Were Republicans going to do the same thing when Obama did something right? No.
True.
You had, and this is the new game. This is the new game that they're playing, where they will not give any inch to each other at all. And it's because you're right, and you're wrong, and I'm right. That's
it's binary.
Yes,
it's binary. You can't be right and me be right at the same time.
Well, because that's the cognitive dissonance that we're starting to see.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where people have to start having. You've got to have more leaders standing up. And I think, Eddie, you've got one of them in your former home state of Nevada. Jackie Rosen.
Senator Rosen is doing amazing work. And Cortez Masto, but listen, Senator Rosen, I give so much credit to. What an amazing, listen, man. She beat my father-in-law.
Yeah.
In an election.
Yeah.
Right? I love Jackie Rose, and I think she's phenomenal. I love my father-in-law. I think they're both great, and they both understood the complexity of the situation. And the Democrat Party needs more people like Jackie, in my opinion. And I think we see a lot more leaders like that that are growing and having the courage, like you said, Sisto. But you're right. It sucks. I mean, the government shutdown's going on right now. We haven't talked about that at all. But look at some of the Democrats that are reaching over and saying, hey, let's come to a compromise. It's not about who's right and who's wrong. It's about doing what is right for the American people.
Well, and I mean,
or what is right for the international community.
And I think that there comes a point where you have to start where the political rhetoric has to get toned down, and you've got to come to some type of compromise. Now, I will admit I have been surprised with the President Trump's tone through this entire thing. Although it hasn't been as celebratory as he normally would be in a win like this, and not as full of ego and pomp and circumstance, even while he's pivoting, talking about, ending the conflict in Ukraine. He even there, the man has turned on his buddy Putin. He keeps saying, I mean, the other day I was laughing at him because he's over there saying, I don't know how much longer, if I was Vladimir, I'd get the heck out of there. That's too much loss of life. That's too many casualties. That's too much stuff going on. Why is he still sticking around there? He can't win. When just 8 months ago, he had the president of Ukraine in the Oval Office saying, you don't have a card to play in all of this. And now he's praising him that he's winning the war, right? Yeah. So, but are we going to give him credit for changing direction on that? Or are we just going to stand back and criticize him for, well, you should have known that from day one. You should have been on the right side of it. You should have been on the right side of it. Or there's a conspiracy theory.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. His son-in-law is going to make millions of dollars. There's investments here, investments there. Like, I'm sick of hearing on both sides the excuses on why we can't praise success that happens. Because these politicians work really hard, no matter what you say. All politicians work really hard. And when they do something right, all of them, regardless of party, are warranted the praise and acclaim that we as American people can give them. And that's the truth.
And that's where, that leads us to the heart of this whole entire podcast. We sit here, and a lot of the times we want to have a conversation about where people land on a lot of these different issues, and one of it, and when people actually, shift and turn in the right direction, we should be praising them. We should be giving them thanks. We should be saying, hey, good job. Way to go. Now let's move on to the next thing. For those of you who were around with me and Eddie in the early 2000s and watching The West Wing, what was President Bartlett's favorite saying? What's next? Right?
Yeah.
We got that done. What's next? Let's move on to the next thing. And let's fix the next problem.
Who's my favorite president of all time?
Yeah, well, Jed Bartlett. There you go. Everybody's favorite. A fictional president. Yeah. So real quick, Eddie, we're gonna do our try takes real quick here, because after that we're gonna turn it over to our viewers. But it's our favorite part of the show, our try takes. So Eddie, what do you got for me that's prickly, spicy, and quickly?
All right. Prickly, spicy, and quickly, all in one for you, Sisto. I want to take time to acknowledge a very important person in the Cactus Crossfire life, in the Tri-Strategies life, in you, my dear brother, in your life. I know that you recently had a loss in your family, your patriarch, the leader of your family, the leader of and shaper of who you have become, Papa Abeyta, Guilfred Abeyta, and I would love nothing more for us to cherish his legacy. One, because of your companionship, your friendship. I have much love for you, sir, and I know how much he meant to you, to your sister, to your entire family, and he will be sorely missed. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge him. He was a hardworking man. You've given me so many great stories. I feel like I know a very small amount of who he was. But I like to punt it to you and allow you to use your quickly, prickly, and spicy time to talk about the amazing man that he was and is in the memory of you and his progeny moving forward.
Well, thanks, Eddie. My dad had been sick for a while, and unfortunately, he passed while I was on vacation, which I talked with a couple of friends, and they said, he probably did that on purpose because he didn't want me around to worry about him and stuff like that.
Yeah.
A lot of folks that didn't know my dad, the one thing that I can tell them is that if you want to know my dad, just get to know me. My dad gave me all the best parts of him, and I look a lot like my dad. Now that he had been in the hospital, the hardest part was that he hadn't had his beard in a very long time, and so he had been there for a month. His beard had grown out, and my niece actually went over to see him kind of there towards the end and said, she's like, Nino, Grandpa looks just like you because he has a beard now. And so, my dad, the best parts of me are from my father. And, my father was a guy, he didn't have much. He was an HVAC guy. He often lovingly referred to himself as, I'm just a pig farmer, which led me to also later on in life start quoting and saying, I don't know much, I'm just the son of a pig farmer, which always gave him a big kick when I would say it at Democratic functions or whatever. I don't know much, but I'm the son of a pig farmer. It used to give him a big kick. Everything I know about politics and everything I know about taking care of people and supporting people, I learned from my dad. He was the guy that would have given you the shirt off his back, whether you needed it or not. And just because you may need a shirt later on. And he often used to tell me a lot of the times, Mijo, I hate that I taught you to be so giving because you're never going to be rich. And I would have to stand here and tell everybody that I'm probably one of the richest people around because he gave me that. And he gave me that. And so, as a part of my dad's legacy, a lot of folks, I'm going to just be asking folks that come to me and say, what can I do for you? How can I help you? What can we do for you? Remember this, is that you always have time for somebody else who needs help. My dad, we grew up in a small little town, Veguita, New Mexico, population 498 because me and my sister have left. But there were people in that community that we always didn't get along. We always didn't see eye to eye. But my dad was an HVAC guy and a plumber. If your pilot light went out and it was the cold of winter and you had done my father wrong, you could drive up to our front door and ask him to help. And he would load up and go do it. If your pipes froze, I was out there helping. And some of you people, you know who you are that made me freeze, warming up your pipes and getting them unfrozen. He never, and I used to tell him, Dad, but that guy says this about you, or that guy says that about you. He goes, Mijo, it doesn't matter. They'll need me before I need them. And my dad's whole thing was that just to help people and be there for people when they need it. And so I ask everybody to do that for my dad. Be there for each other. Help people when they need it. Even if you don't like them. Even if you can't stand them. Be there for them. Because someday you just might need them. And so that's who my dad was. I want to thank Eddie for giving me time to talk about him. Like I said, everything I know about politics I learned from my dad. I said it before once on this podcast. Everything I know about politics I learned from my dad. I learned how to win from my mom. That's what I would remind people of, and I want to thank a lot of the people that have called and texted and reached out to me and my family about this. But with all of that being said, he's not gone. He's still here. You're looking right at him. So like I always tell everybody, if you wanna know who my father is, just get to know me, and you'll learn all you need to know. So thanks, Eddie.
You're welcome, and thank you for that, Sisto.
So, since we've skipped over that, our quickly prickly and spicy
This time
section.
only.
This time only. You and I have now, we're on episode 8, and we have gotten quite the little following here.
Look at that.
And we have some great comments from folks that our producer Mandy has been pulling up and looking at with folks, and they've been talking to us about them. So Eddie, we've got our good friend. Let's start up with the which one is it? One Man Joe. Progressive. One Man Joe.
OMJ the show.
OMJ the show. He says, progressive whacktivists, okay? This is made up. The right-wing media talking point. Real people aren't out there thinking Democratic men and are feminine or that masculinity is toxic. Toxic masculinity is toxic. Look at Dem politicians versus Republicans in power, Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, Matt Gaetz, Trump, not winning the masculine award. What the right has done is feminize education. What's funny is all these right-wingers on power are college educated. Conservatives are such marks.
Well, I welcome feedback. I think it's great, but I think it's also great that you get to participate in the conversation. One Man Joe, and I would just say that, you know what? I'm not disputing that there's not this interjection of femininity in the Republican Party, but I will tell you, going back to that episode, Democrats are losing. And if you want to talk about femininity in the Democratic Party and where we are tripping up, I'm calling attention to Governor Karen out there in California. This is what we got to get away from, One Man Joe. And I hope you're with me on that.
And here's one that I enjoyed so much because it comes from a good buddy of mine, right there, Cody P. My good little buddy Cody. I love my little socialist. He just became a daddy. He's one of my favorite most amazing guys ever, and I'm happy that he's engaging with us. I'm happy that he showed up. Cody has this to say: I'm going to sharply disagree. It's entirely possible for any man to display masculinity and not be toxic. It's more about how you actually show up in life. Some of the lost masculine people I know are also the kindest and most compassionate. They aren't, mutually exclusive.
Mutually exclusive. Cody P, you got to watch the whole episode, man. I think you just watched little clips. Come on, Cody P.
and when
we're not saying anything other than that either, man.
Yeah,
masculinity is all of that.
But this goes into what we were talking about earlier, Eddie. These are the comments that are people on our clips, right? It's the clips.
Yeah.
And so you got to watch the whole thing, Cody. And Cody did go through and watch the rest of it because I think you see Cody kind of change his tune along the way, even though he does disagree with us a bit. Here's another one. I love what is that one? That's who is that? Cody Peluso right there. Interesting discussion. I came for the cowboy hat and I stayed for the conversation. So there you go. He
yeah, but now you got a fedora on, man. We're gonna lose a viewer because you're wearing stinking fedoras.
And it's only because I went to Greece, man. I went to Greece.
Okay.
Well,
Well, I know it's not up here, but I got hit up on my last comment. Someone posted, Eddie, what are you wearing? Woo! They came at me for my fashion. I mean,
Eddie,
Sisto, everyone's like, why do you have the old school? I'm like, I am old school. This is what I like.
Eddie,
this is my game. I love the things in my ears, but they didn't like the brown jacket and taupe shirt.
Well, I will tell you, Eddie, I am very lucky that I have a great fashion consultant sitting with us right across the way, our own producer, Mandy. If I'm ever having a bad day, I just let Mandy see what I'm wearing, and then Mandy's like, perfect, you're looking great, do your thing, you're good to go. And then, unfortunately, I show up here looking a certain way. I know that you're still shooting in Utah, so she can't give you the once over to make sure that the taupe and the jacket are matching with you in your studio over there. But I get the better end of the deal because Mandy's always telling me if I'm not looking good. So there you go.
We love you, Mandy. Thank you. I'm gonna have to send my dress outfits ahead of time so you can
I
guide me in
think
the right way.
I think the kids out there on the TikToks and the Instagrams are talking about fit checks. I think we need Eddie fit checks on your Instagrams.
All right.
I think you need to start stepping up your game, brother, because
I got up my game.
I'm already I'm working my I'm working the TikTok and I'm about to be in a new tax bracket here pretty soon with all the live streaming that I'm doing on TikTok. So
We love TikTok.
we do love TikTok. We do love TikTok.
All
Thank
right.
you everybody for tuning in. We hope that you'll like, subscribe, go to cactuscrossfire.com, visit us there, subscribe, and get our up to the date information on all of what we're doing here at Cactus Crossfire. Thank you all for showing up, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.